To another lecture at the Center for Near Eastern Studies. For those of you who may not have, this is our spring brochure, and I hope you all sign up so you get email and e-notices. It's my pleasure this day to introduce Professor Touraj Daryaee, who is the Howard C. Baskerville Professor in the History of Iran and the Persianate World, and who's also the Associate Director of the Dr. Samuel M. Jordan Center for Persian Study and Culture at the University of California, Irvine. Professor Daryaee is a graduate of UCLA, 1999, received his PhD here, esteemed, remarkable, and he's done much since he graduated. He has, just to mention some of his extraordinary scholarship, the most recent one is, and for this reason we're celebrating, we've invited him to speak, either about the book or anything else he wants to speak about. This is the most recent book, Sasanian Persia, The Rise and Fall of an Empire, and I'll just pass it around. Have a look. He's also edited a volume of the Oxford History of Iran that's coming out in 2011. Let's see, there were a series of lectures that he gave. Let's see, it's called at the K.R. Kama Oriental Institute in Mumbai. Those were lectures in 2010, and those lectures are also going to be published in text of late antique geography, epic and history. That was 2002, and I'm not going to go on with the rest of his extraordinary bibliography. And he's going to pass around some of the works that have appeared
for the center.
Under the auspices of the center that he is the associate director of. So he's also the editor of the International Journal of Ancient Iranian Studies, and he's also in charge at UC Irvine of the project, the Late Antique Near East Project, Sanica. So his talk today is From Oxus to Euphrates, Approaching the History of Late Antique Iran Shah. Please join me in welcoming Professor Daryaee.
Thank you, Professor Slomovics. Thank you for the invitation. It's a special honor to be here, especially the place I went to school at UCLA. And one of my professors is here, who I'm going to say things with some trepidation now that she's present. And also I had an office at the end of this hall, which I occupied for many years until I was kicked out. So it was really the experience. We have two professors I studied with. So again, it's a pleasure to be here, to the place that I got my training, and whatever good came of it, it is because of this institution and the Center for Middle East Studies History Department. And so that made it very special. I'm not sure how many of you were here last month, but I did give another talk, which is the addendum to the handout that you're holding, which is it should be page 3 and 4 of the handout, which was the transformation of Iranian lore to history and epic. What I tried to discuss at that talk was to suggest that between 200 to about 1200 CE, for about 1,000 years, we do indeed, I think, can grasp a cultural unit, what I call Iran Shah, which has a specific cultural orbit, certain mores and values and ideas that in fact exist in this Oxus to Euphrates landmass, and I call it Iran Shah. And I gave the reasonings why, how this came about. I tried to actually discuss something about the Sasanian Empire itself, as to how this cultural idea came into being. What was their plan and how it played out. So that was the talk that I gave last time. I was actually at the now Near Eastern Languages and Cultures. And I think it's not only important when I'm discussing for late antique history, but also for Islamic history as well. And it's more today of a critique of perhaps the way in the West, in the East, in Iran as well, the way they approach history perhaps of this period that sometimes gets slashed and cut depending on the academic setting and the way the discipline is actually really set. And this has made this Oxus to, you might say, Euphrates, well, to a lesser extent Iraq, a terra incognita, a place that it's known, yes, it's acknowledged, it's important, and must be studied. But when we come to actualities, you really look at this place as a discipline that's not exactly, Islamic studies. And I mentioned last time I invoked the words of Hodgson at the von Grunebaum Center for Near Eastern Studies, that I think the way the discipline had been made up in the U.S. and in the West, that Islam and Arab and Islam have become synonymous, and hence that is the purview of what we call Islamic studies. While there are these other people, including the sort of Iranian world, that is very much part of it. But once we start talking about, studying Buyid, studying the Buyids, or going further east, looking at the Ghurids, for example, which I help my friends who do Indian history, for example, right? This is Islam, but it's just compartmentalized into another category. Or you're looking at, Kharazm Shahs and whatnot. It's just too far away for those people who are comfortable in their setting to do Islamic studies. It is Islam, yes, but it's just too far away. And there's far less interest and less study of that period, or that era, I might say. Now, the reason I'm making this case has to do also something that I think happened at UCLA a while ago. And since I have some freedom to say some things today, I would just, let it off my chest. When I was a graduate student finishing here, we had a person who taught modern Iranian history. And it was decided in the history department to move away from nation-state histories, or something as such that it was taught. So we do modern, pre-modern, and sort of medieval. In effect, what happened is, for the medieval, well, state medieval, the pre-modern became really an Ottoman position, and the modern became an Arabic position, Arab history. And it axed the Iranian history. And one reason was because this is Iran. It's a single nation state as opposed to this larger Arab world, which of course has many countries and diversity. And the Ottoman Empire, something that's very important vis-a-vis Europe and the West. What I tried again to make a point is, Iran Shah doesn't mean modern nation state of Iran. It is an assemblage of certain nation states, or an area that I'm imagining between these two rivers, let's say. If we think of Mesopotamia, I'm thinking of a larger sort of expanse of Tigris to Euphrates, where there is a culture at work here that you could call it the sort of Iran Shah cultural study. And hence, it is viable to have actually professorships who teach this area, not, again, to be involved that, oh, this is a nation state, not a nation state. It's a much larger entity and a cultural unit that could be studied. And that was the point that I tried to make last time I was here. Now, for the talk today, I'm going to start with late antiquity. And since my professor is here, that would be, I think, just fine as well. If you look at Roman numeral 1, what you see are two works that I've just chosen in the 90s and the 21st century, so late 20th, early 21st century, where I think these attest to the fact, I think, that the Sasanians, which I know a little bit about and have been interested, are becoming part of this discourse of late antique studies, which I think is quite healthy. It's very good. Michael Morney has written a little handout that I've printed at the center, why Iran should be included in late antique studies, to actually make an argument as to why it should be. And you see James Howard Johnston's long article on the two great powers of late antiquity, and Matthew Canepa, my colleague and friend, who's recently come out with this book, The Two Eyes of the Earth, Art and Ritual of Kingship Between Rome and Sasanian Iran, are beginning to do comparative stuff. I think that I'm much weaker at. I think the generation after me is much better that are dealing with these issues. And I think this is quite healthy and good. But this wasn't really the case, I think, before the 1980s. And at the end of the talk, I think I'll go back to that. But in reality, we were looking at a very different perspective of studying late antiquity. I just did a random search on, UC system, what is it called? Melville?
No, that's the, yes, it was Malcolm.
No. So if you just type Rome, not even Roman Empire, and Sasanians, what you end up getting about 43,000 hits on the Sasanian, on the Roman bit, and about 163 oddities of anything related to the Sasanians. That sounds a bit strange, just having looked at Roman numeral 1, reading that the two great powers in late antiquity, one being Byzantines and then the other the Sasanians, or Canepa's book, between Rome and Iran. If these are the two great powers of late antiquity, how is it that one surpasses far more in terms of studies and attention that's been done? I don't want to give the reason. There's, I think, multiple explanations for this, certainly. But of course, some of that go with the way that we look at this period of history, especially in the West. I could start with the 19th century. If you look at the next Roman numeral 3, the way Europeans have dealt with Sasanians have been kind of strange and I think at the same time interesting. I've just chosen a depiction of the last Sasanian king, who seems to be of interest not only for those who do late antique history, Roman history, Iranians, but also Islamic history. What you get is very much, a 19th century Orientalist view of what, how things are. So John Malcolm, an important 19th century author, discusses Yazgir, the last Sasanian king. Yazgir III protracted for several years a wretched and precarious existence. You hardly, my point is, you never find anything positive to be said about these Sasanians. Now, it's either people who are specifically studying the Sasanians, or if you're looking at it from the Roman side. From the Roman side, that's much clearer. You have the sort of the enemies and nemesis on the other side. Or the first book that was written on the Sasanians in the West by George Rawlinson, The Seventh Great Oriental Monarchy, again discussing Yazgir, says, no historian has a word of commiseration for the last of the Sasani, who is reproached with feebleness, cowardice, and effeminacy, or effeminacy. So this is again a typical explanation of this, usually not even Sasanians, the Persian. I think goes back to the sort of Greek stereotype, sort of the effeminate Persian. And just as you find lots of these tropes in such works. So we shouldn't be really that surprised that there hasn't been much work, at least until recently, on the Sasanians. I think when we study the Near East or the Middle East between, let's say, time of Alexander the Great to the coming of Islam, in fact, we find almost a huge gap, at least in academia in the West. Yes, it's important, but Alexander the Great is the last one that's important. Perhaps the Seleucids, because it's vestiges of this Alexander the Great conquest, and then you have Islam. And yes, there are these other dynasties, 450 years here and another 400 years there. We know about them, they're interesting, but that's about that. And so there is a gap. But when we come to them, this is the type of depiction in terms of art. Again, Roman numeral 3, part 3, this is what Rawlinson, the person who is the supposed expert on Sasanians, writes as, bas reliefs of the Sasanians are extremely numerous, and though generally rude and sometimes even grotesque, are not without certain amount of merit, well, at least some merit there. Or he goes on, at worst, should it be thought that Byzantine influence appears so plainly in the later Sasanian works that Rome, rather than Persia, must be credited with the buildings and sculpture. Now, some of this may hold true, but I think all in all, what the book represents is all of these ideas that these people have nothing to offer, except as this sort of wily enemies of the Romans, and they decide to, from time to time, as my professor said, they take these predatory attacks against the Romans. And this is when we are studying Mesopotamia, most likely, where the Romans have their own sort of defensive forts. Of course, I would counter is, well, where's the Sasanian capital of Ctesiphon in Mesopotamia? And where's Rome? I mean, by this time we would start, thinking about, Byzantium perhaps, but still Rome. Rome, as it's much farther away from Mesopotamia than the Sasanians are actually.